Hello, Brian Pierce with the Pierce Brothers. Today we're going to cover the Pietta single action armies, and this is going to be kind of a general review of these, but just an overview of some of the design features, the differences between it and the Uberti single action, the Cattleman as they're so commonly called. But these are great little guns. They it's kind of an interesting history of Pietta, but they of course began replica firearm reproductions back in the early 60s, and this particular gun though was introduced about 2003, and it kind of made its debut a little bit as the Great Western II. They actually produced some prior to that too, but they weren't quite as nice a gun as when they came out with the Great Western II. That's the best way to put that. The frames were a little bit odd and some things, but they revamped the line, came out with the Great Western II in 2003. And the unique thing about this gun is that it's actually a very close copy to the Colt single action, much more so than the Ubertis. So in other words, the outside dimension of the cylinder, the outside measurement here, is 1.650. Some guns will be up to 1.655, whereas the Colt have always held pretty much dead on at 1.650 since the beginning of time, clear back in 1873. So the length of the cylinder likewise is the same as the Colt. Now, if you compare that to a Uberti, the Uberti has an outside diameter, cylinder diameter of 1.670. So there's a little more steel, a little more mass there. The trained eye, by glancing at the two, will pick it up immediately that the Pietta is a smaller frame, or the Colt frame, whereas the Uberti is a larger frame. And so there's some other significant features as well that probably are noteworthy. One is that for the last 20 plus years, the Pietta has had what's known as a recoil plate, and that's exactly the same as what the Colt single action has. It sits right here, and it encases, it's where the firing pin hole comes through the frame. If you look, there's a little plate in there, and that plate, if it ever gets peened out or the firing pin hole becomes worn, it's easily tapped out from the rear, boom, and can be replaced and staked in place just like the factory does it. Now, most gunsmiths won't have that special staking tool to do it, but it's not a difficult job at all. But that's a special hardened, heat-treated plate. Another feature it has is underneath the ejector rod, and I'll include a photo of this video on that, but there's an ejector housing support stud mounted in the barrel. The Ubertis do not have that. The Colts, the early ones did not, but then they immediately began doing it because the early Colts had such soft barrels that hole would work its way loose with recoil and so forth, and they decided to put a stud in it. Ruger actually has done both. The early guns had it, later production not so much, but that's still a nice feature because it gives more support to ejector tube and ejector housing in general. The rest of the gun is pretty much Colt pattern. The way it works, there's a couple other notable changes though. One is that the hand spring, rather than being a leaf spring, it is a coil spring, and actually both can work very well. If the spring quality is substandard, or if the spring, the hand spring is not properly fit, they can break prematurely. So some companies such as Uberti and Pietta have chosen just to go to a coil spring, similar to what Ruger does on their single actions, particularly the old model single actions. And a couple of things I really like about the Pietta actually is they've done the chambers right on these guns. They're chambered to a minimum, industry standard minimum. The throats typically measure 452. I don't think I've ever made, in fact, 451.5 to 453 is kind of where they always measure at. I've checked a number of them. They shoot well. They have hammer forged barrels. If I had to criticize the barrels a little, once in a while I've seen a gun come out with a little bit of a rough barrel. A little bit of fire lapping and so forth can fix that, but generally they're good and good shooters. They come in a variety of finishes. In fact, Pietta's got so many combinations it's hard to even begin to mention them all, but laser engraving has become very common on many of them, and they still do a lot with a two-tone frame. This particular one actually has a stainless backstrap and trigger guard. The rest of it is just an all blue gun. Kind of an interesting look. They also do brass, and those are usually a less costly gun versus the all steel with blue in case color and so forth. Another option they do is walnut grips, which boy, there's nothing wrong with the appearance of traditional one-piece walnut grips on a single action. They look great to me. This particular gun's a cattle brand gun, they call it, and it's nickel plated, but it has Old West cattle brands on it. For those that may not be familiar with cattle brands, everybody thinks of them as Old West. They're still a part of the New West. They, for example, my personal brand is the 44 brand. It goes on cattle on the right shoulder, and that's registered with the state of Idaho. If I have a cow or cattle that get out on somebody else's pasture, they can instantly track whose they are. If somebody steals or wrestles those cattle, they've got to go a long ways away, another state, to get them sold or butchered or something to keep from getting caught. And and then also cattle brands can come in all sorts of different shapes because it makes it hard to take a running iron and change a brand into something else. And so brands protect the ranchers financially, as a general rule. But this is a cattle brand gun. Cattle brand guns actually been around a long time. First one that I was aware of, one of the earliest ones, dates clear back to the 1880s. A popular English actress gave Judge Roy Bean, of all things, a cattle brand gun that was engraved by a noted engraver in Texas, and that's a kind of a historic gun too. Colagee is the one that probably did more popularizing of it in modern times. He was an active engraver. Most of his work was in the 40s and early 50s, and he helped to popularize it. And today there's a number of engravers that will still do cattle brand guns, mostly master pattern stuff. So yeah, there you have it. I was going to mention also, there's a couple of things to know about this gun. There's a number of importers. EMF, Early Modern Firearms in California, was originated by Boyd Davis way back, late 40s. I'm not sure when it was founded exactly, but he began selling the original Great Western Arms Company guns. I think about 55 he began selling them. They began business in 53, began making guns in 54. I think by 55 he was selling them through his catalog and so forth. But he turned and bought the company, I think, in 1959. And now, interestingly, when Boyd Davis, and he's the one that started SAS, Single Action Shooting Society and so forth, he passed away about 10 years ago in rough numbers. And when he did, Pietta, of all companies, turned and bought EMF. And that's when, not long after that, the Great Western 2 came out and so forth. But these are actually really good guns. I've shot and owned a number of them. They time up nicely. They have a Colt pattern hammer. One thing I really appreciate about them is that the hammer has the full-sized hammer cam, which means that they're easy to get to time well. We've seen a number of single actions with safety devices in the hammer, and that almost always moves the hammer cam that runs the bolt, and it makes it hard to time them correctly. And so that feature is a very good feature. Now, but with that said, because there is really no safety, the first cock notch is not a great safety. The weight of the gun being dropped on the ground will cause the trigger sear to break off and the gun fire. So really should never carry one with that first so-called safety notch engaged. It's a good way to shoot yourself in the leg, or worse, somebody else gets injured or something. So the best way is just to load one, skip one, load 4 more. After you've placed in the 4th cartridge, bring the gun to full cock, and you can lower the hammer and it will land right on the empty chamber. And that can be verified while you're practicing. looking through the side of the cylinder, and you'll see that empty chamber where the firing pin comes through and rests. In that position, the gun can be carried all day long. It can be dropped, hit, whatever's going to happen to it, not going to fire. Properly handled, the single action is an incredibly safe gun. So this kind of brings us to the another subject on these, and that is how they get them imported with you know, not being able to pass the drop test. And if you look closely on the base pin, there's 2 notches for the cross slot to engage. And so basically, when the gun is being used to pass the drop test, that upper notch is engaged, and so at that position the hammer cannot come into full contact with the cartridge. It stops premature right there, and you can drop it, bang it all day long, it's not going to move. That's known as the Swiss safety. So the other point I want to make on these two is that EMF, of course, imports probably the most of them. I'm actually not sure on that, but there are other importers as well. Cabela's imports them. Cimarron Firearms, Mike Harvey, and they import some wonderful versions that are very traditional looking and so forth. Of course, it's been chambered in many calibers. 38, 357 typically fired from the same cylinder. You can also get extra cylinders for it in 9mm, even primarily that being the caliber as well, not just getting the 357 cylinder, but also 38 Super. They offer 44 40, 45 Colt. I'd love to see them offer a 44 Special. If they do, I have not seen one yet. But they offer it in most popular calibers. But the Pietta's a great gun. I have a lot of respect for it, and it's a remarkable gun for the price point that it's at. So yeah, very worthy gun. They've been popular with cowboy action shooters that shoot the heck out of them. One thing I did fail to mention also is that they have the cylinder, just exactly like the Colts, has a removable cylinder bushing. And why that's important is over time, any single action with shooting a lot will develop some cylinder end shake. And so basically you buy a new bushing and you fit it to your gun to minimize the cylinder end shake. End shake can cause functioning problems if it becomes excessive, cause headspace issues, accuracy begins to deteriorate and so forth. So keeping that cylinder tight with end shake is important, and that's a very easy modification at home. So you buy the bushing, you fit it in your gun. If you're an amateur, you basically a drill or something, you can take that bushing and take it down a few thousandths of time until you get just that perfect fit for your individual gun, so there's minimal end shake. And a tip also, for what it may be worth, I keep synthetic grease on the back of the cylinder and on the front, just a little amount, and that actually acts as a shock absorber while you're shooting them. And then of course when you're done shooting, you clean it up anyway, put on a little tiny amount of grease inside or on the ratchet and on the forward end of the cylinder, and that really helps prevent excess cylinder wear. So but they're very handsome guns. I especially am fond just the all blue case colored combination. So but there you have it. The Pietta single action is a wonderful gun. It's worth considering. Street prices, depending on the model, some of the entry models without flutes and so forth on the cylinder, I think the street prices are around about $450 on those. Extra cylinders add to that. Special finishes such as the cattle brand nickel plating, that's even more. I think that one street price is about $850 or $900. The blue and case color versions are probably most popular. I like them because they're most traditional, but I think street prices are somewhere in the $575 to $650 range on these typically. So there you have it, the Pietta. It's a great gun, worth considering, especially first-time buyers, or if you just need another single action or trying to try a different caliber. Very good gun for the money. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Pierce Brothers.